The copy of Digimon World Next Order I'm reviewing was supplied by Bandai Namco. The only thing expected of me was that I review the game, and no other instructions accompanied that. I'm not obligated to talk about specific things, nor am I forbidden from talking negatively about the game, and this video, much like every other video I've ever done, consists entirely of my honest opinion. While I don't think this will affect my opinion of the game, and you may not even care, I'd be a shitty person if I didn't state this in as transparent a manner as possible. This video will also operate on the assumption that you've seen my videos on the original Digimon World and Redigitize respectively, so if you haven't, you can find them in the description. Now that you've got all the critical information, let's talk about the game. So the big selling point of Next Order was the addition of a second partner. Going in, I was concerned that this may make the caring aspects of gameplay even more monotonous. I was also worried that the gradual casualization of the series would come into full effect, removing the charm of the original and the remnants of said charm in Redigitize. My fears weren't entirely unwarranted, as Next Order is more accessible than both of the former titles, and this does have an impact, but overall I think they balanced it pretty well. When you start the game, you're forced to pick between a boy and a girl, and both potential protagonists look great, which is a fantastic change from Cyber Sleuth, where they both looked like over-designed yellow garbage. This boils down to personal taste more than anything, but I think it's worth a mention, and while we're on the subject of personal taste, let's address the English voice acting. I'm generally someone who can't stand dubs in Japanese media, but I'll put up with it in games because I'm not a snooty prick. However, the dubs were so bad in Next Order that I had to immediately change the voices to Japanese. And that's not to say the Japanese voices aren't shit, it's just that I couldn't tell the difference. While this is a preference more than a critique, I've got to praise the dual audio options, as it's a frequent feature people beg for but is rarely implemented, and it ultimately increased my enjoyment of the title. So after you stop hating yourself and set the voiceovers to Japanese, you'll find yourself in a 15-minute long tutorial which explains how battles work this time around. I'm not entirely opposed to a tutorial in this form, as it does establish the beginning threads of a story, as well as making sure the player fully understands how combat works by allowing them to participate. With that said, after the standout tutorials found in Redigitize and the complete lack of one in the original game, I can't help but think there could have been a less intrusive way to convey this information to the player. It doesn't help that not 10 minutes after that tutorial, and after you fought the first real battle, there's another tutorial explaining more combat basics. This is shit that should have been covered in the first tutorial or shoved in an optional menu somewhere, and I find all of this extremely intrusive. It seems like the developers didn't trust that the player would figure shit out for themselves. I do get why they've done it. Accessibility is important to many designers, but at a certain point, you've got to cut the child loose and throw them into the deep end with no floaties. These instances were tolerable, especially in comparison to a lot of AAA games nowadays, but if this is the slope Digimon World sliding down, I'd hate to see what happens when it hits the bottom. After the initial tutorial, you're presented with the option of picking 2 Digi-Eggs to replace your fallen monsters. I much prefer this to just 1 Digi-Egg, as now it's much quicker and easier to traverse the evolution trees than ever before. It's also said that humans struggle to make choices not based on what they'll gain, but on what they could potentially lose. As someone who often struggles with this myself, being able to select 2 types of eggs made this decision way less of a chore. The doubling up of eggy goodness was a smart decision on the developer's part. Not only does having 2 partners spice up the formula with no need for a major overhaul, but also highlights how much choice you have when it comes to building a team. If you haven't played the game yet, you're probably thinking that managing 2 shitting machines seems like a tough job, and it's honestly no harder than 1. The interaction menu has been simplified, so it automatically interacts with both monsters by default. If you open up the menu to feed one monster, it will feed them both automatically. If one monster isn't hungry, it'll feed the one who is. You can also manually select between Digimon while caring for them. This is one of the smartest changes made to Next Order, as it completely negates most of the additional pain that would have been added by caring for a second partner. There are some leftover issues, such as the general grind of getting Digimon to a point where they don't have their shit pushed in, and also desyncing lifespans. Naturally, Digimon have separate lifespans, and each evolution has its own maximum life expectancy. If, for some reason, one of your monster friends doesn't make it to the same evolutionary stage as the other, you'll find that they'll die earlier and it'll knock their lives out of sync entirely. This is insanely hard to fix, and can make progression much more difficult than it has to be. At a certain point in the game, you can recruit a Digimon who can incrementally repair this age disparity, but it's a very minute fix for a very large issue. It doesn't help that getting your partners to a point where you can make reasonable progress is also a heavy grind, and with a desynced lifespan, it becomes even more tedious trying to find a good time to go out and actually achieve shit. I like to think that Digimon World executes in phases. You have a long phase where you train incessantly, which is broken up by short phases that become a race against the clock. Once you hit that final Digivolution stage, you're generally good to explore, recruit Digimon, and progress the story, and this happens around day 12 into the life cycle. Assuming the lives of your partners are perfectly synced and you have the Life Extender skill tree, this gives you about 7 or 8 days before your partners die and the cycle begins anew. Because of the limited window you're granted, you have to hit the ground running, which is exhilarating and incredibly gratifying, but also adds immense stress, as you know you're fighting the clock more than you're fighting the game. There are certain allowances afforded to the player when they hit that point, such as Megas not having to use the bathroom, which can make progressing more of a focused dash as opposed to a cautious jog. I understand why people stop playing Digimon World before they make significant progress, as they feel all the lows but never quite hit that high, which is a shame as that's really what it's all about. With that said, the deep lows are off-putting to a large number of people because they consist almost entirely of tedious grinding as you juggle the needs of your companions. Granted, the protagonist levels up and can unlock specific abilities which minimize the tedious parts of the game, and it's a nice middle ground between tradition and casualization. It's not a large-scale fix, as the tedium still grates, but the level ups just go to show that maybe all the Digimon World series needed is a sequence of small fixes as opposed to a large overhaul. Much like the original game and redigitized, most of your time in Next Order will be spent training in the gym, and while mildly different, it's just as boring. There are 4 chapters of story in total, and anything past the first will require a couple of swole Digibros to prevent a bloody slaughter. The way training works with 2 Digimon is that you're now given a menu to select what stat you'd like to train, and you can assign each partner independently to any stat. Where in the old games, you'd physically approach the training tool and it felt like your monsters were actually doing something, here you simply hit a timed button press and gain stats magically. I take issue with this, even though it removes some of the tedium found in the previous titles. It's the same problem I have with feeding your partners and taking them to the bathroom. The animations have been entirely removed, and it now lacks that element of physicality that comes with caring for a living creature, which is a part of why we fell in love with the original game. Instead of it being an often infuriating yet equally charming experience, it now feels like a dull digital checklist. I never thought watching a Digimon chew his food or squeeze out a pink condensed version of said food would add anything to the game, but it feels completely vacant without those ostensibly unimportant things. Removing the bathroom animations makes more sense with 2 Digimon, as it'd be tedious to wait for both of them to rumble out a steamer, and having them both walk into the toilet at once would be stupid, but I still miss that humanizing element. Or digitizing element, I guess? It just doesn't matter, The world of Next Order is quite a bit larger than I expected, consisting of 10 different areas, and contained within each is anywhere from 5 to 10 sub-areas. Of course, there are a few generic staples, plains, desert, volcano, tundra, etc., but it wouldn't be a Digimon game if it didn't go above and beyond with the map diversity. Because of the way the sub-areas are split, it allowed the developers to create variety within the standardized themes, and outside of those tired styles exist some very interesting designs. For example, contained within Communist Delivery Room is a war camp full of carnivorous furries, opposite a palace full of pussy hipster vegans, and in the middle is a bridge. It's a nice bridge. The persistent theme present in almost every Digimon game, where the natural is masterfully fused with the mechanical, is back, and no matter how many times I see this style, it never gets old. The PS4 version of Next Order also received a bunch of graphical updates and redesigns, and the polish really shows. In each map is a set number of wild Digimon, and they serve as more of a precaution than anything. While they will flee if you're significantly stronger than them, anything less will see these persistent beasts relentlessly hound you as you dash cautiously in an attempt to avoid a conflict. Battles have never raised stats enough to replace training in the gym, and the bits you gain from most Digimon are minuscule, so the only purpose they serve is putting a fresh player in their place, or grinding experience to level up your tamer. There are also giant Digimon, who randomly spawn in certain areas of the map, and these are a great way to spice shit up. It's a strange feeling to be exploring or running between quest lines only to find this giant green piece of shit flopping about behind some terrain. They do yield quite a bit more experience and bits than their standard size counterparts, and an unprepared tamer will get absolutely destroyed, which is precisely why I love them. The extra layer of challenge and unpredictability goes a long way in keeping a fairly repetitive experience feeling fresh. Keeping shit feeling fresh seems to be a large focus in Next Order, as the strain on exploration has been lightened significantly. In the World games of old, there was an excessive focus on MP, as Digimon required it to do even basic attacks. Next Order spices it up yet again by not only adding a second currency for attacks, which are manually enacted by the player, but also by offering plenty of ways to gain large amounts of MP back while you explore. A camp function has been added where you can rest anywhere outside of town, and this will give your monsters a light refresher. There are also skill trees which automatically regenerate HP and MP while walking around, and MP recovery items drop like moist panties when you tell women you review Digimon games on the internet. It seems like a large part of the casualization of the game was to take away as much risk as possible. I first noticed this when my partners were destroyed in combat, yet no life counter popped up to tell me how many chances I had left. I'm unsure as to whether or not death has any consequence, but a large risk from the original has been removed either way. And that's not to say it's all bad, as I think the lack of risk allows people to test more things out and to take more chances. I know whenever playing the original game, I was petrified to even try certain dialogue options when it came to talking to recruitable Digimon, but I'm significantly more confident in Next Order. While I love the fact that I'm less stressed when interacting with recruitable monsters, I also know exactly what to expect every time, as 90% of monsters that end up in the city come there as a result of a fetch quest or a fight. Far too many recruits felt completely effortless or added nothing of worth to the city, and at a certain point, the act of recruitment lost all value to me. It seemed like more often than not, the large amount of recruits was used to slow down my story progress as it gated the next event behind a certain amount of prosperity. I do understand that this was pretty much a necessity to keep the recruitment a significant focus within the narrative, but it was fucking annoying. It's also odd that instead of heading back to your town and discovering what the Digimon do for yourself, you're briefed by Gigimon every time. He gives you a brief rundown of what section of the city they reside in and what services they offer. This also removes the mystery of figuring shit out for yourself, as the recruited Digimon give you a much more specific rundown. Luckily, to make up for the lackluster, flooded recruit system, the town expansion elements are back in full force, and they've taken pages from both the original game and Redigitize. In the original game, the town changed and felt dynamic as you recruited more broskies. In Redigitize, the town didn't change, but it felt populated and alive. In Next Order, it has both of those things and more. I fucking love it! In addition to the town changing of its own accord, you can also manually upgrade buildings yourself with shit you find in the fields. This gives sections of the town both a physical upgrade as well as upgrading the effects of stores and facilities. The only major change I'd make is that the two most essential services, the training facility and the meat farm, were extremely grindy to upgrade. I had beaten the game, I had 147 prosperity, and still didn't have the final upgrades for either. Having these be more accessible would have cut a lot of the tedious parts even further, which is a change that I think needs to happen. The music tracks that play within the town are slightly reworked versions of the original File City themes, both the day and the night versions. I have nothing analytical to say about this, I just wanted to put this in because I adore those themes. There is also a return of ambient noise in some areas at nighttime, which is a lovely effect and something I sorely missed from the original game and just video games in general. The battle theme from the original is also reused for boss fights in Next Order, which is lovely, and I guess we should probably talk about the battles themselves. So other than the difficulty cliff you're constantly thrown off, battles aren't too objectionable. They consist of two automated Digimon duking it out with other automated Digimon. Absolutely riveting stuff. With the addition of AP, or action points, the player can manually select Digimon-specific abilities to use, attacks to execute, or use a new function called EXE Fusion. The Digimon-specific abilities aren't much to write home about, but there are one or two which can pretty much break combat in your favour. If I recall correctly, one of them costs very little AP and doubles your maximum health, as well as healing a significant chunk of it. The ones that aren't brutally overpowered are generally buffs or smaller levels of healing, so they're useful but not to such a large degree. The attacks you can manually execute are the same ones the Digimon will use on their own, but if you trigger them with AP, it will negate the associated MP cost. Since AP can be eternally regenerated by spamming X in battle and resets after every fight, this can be quite advantageous for longer treks with smaller MP pools. And finally, we have EXE Fusion. Fusion works by combining two of your Digimon into a stronger monster and playing some wicked J-pop while it does just that. It takes the stats of both partners and combines them while giving you a shiny new shell to command. You might be thinking, hey, this sounds overpowered. Well, you'd be right, but it's limited to one use per day. It can be triggered in other ways, but it's a very low chance if both of your partners are killed. It's a nice safety net, and it's significantly easier to focus on the single Digimon as opposed to two of them frantically running around a small circle. I honestly think I prefer the older battle systems in Digimon World, as they felt like I was telling a creature what to do by screaming commands at it and not indirectly and effortlessly controlling them. In past games, battle control was a reward for an intelligent Digimon, but in this it's simply there. The state in which your Digimon battle at the start of the game will be the state in which they battle at the end. They'll just be a shitload stronger. I find that it's a bit cluttered and hard to focus on. Plenty of small details are lost in the mess of shit flying around the screen at any given moment, and it makes me feel like my relatively small impact on it is even lesser. It also doesn't help that the camera sucks and frequently gets stuck behind objects or on weird angles. It has 2 modes you can toggle between, but it's shit either way. And speaking of shit, I've got to mention the story briefly. It features elements and themes from both the original game and redigitized, but lacks the impact of either. I won't drop any spoilers for the 3 people who genuinely care about a story in a Digimon game, but let's just say, generic anime narrative featuring the power of friendship and shit. The last point I want to make is about the online system. You can register your Digimon at any stage of their life cycle into one of 3 Digivices and battle them online with random people. Victory is rewarded with points with which you can buy rare and powerful items. I didn't get to try the online system in Cyber Sleuth, so I can't compare the 2, but I enjoyed this mode as a little break from the main game, and I'd love to see another system like this in future entries. It also works independent of PlayStation Plus, which is great because paying for online is theft. To conclude, Digimon World Next Order fixed a lot of things, but at the cost of the charming elements. The core of the game remains the same, and a few minor tweaks made it significantly easier to tolerate, but it will still likely alienate anyone new to the series with the immense amount of grinding. The visuals are fantastic, the audio is a nostalgic circle jerk, and the battle system's a little bit weird, but if you can ignore some of the half-baked design, there is a lot of fun to have here. I'm not entirely sure where they'll take the series next, but even with my gripes out on the table, I think it's heading in a good direction, and it's nice to see the VPET games getting love in the West again. If the developers can steer the ship towards creating a fun, engaging experience and avoid the casualization iceberg on the way there, then I'm hyped for whatever the future holds. If you're not a fan of Digimon and are looking for a PS4 game which will delight you with how different it is, I'd say give it a crack. Even if you're not keen on the grind, there's an easy option which should alleviate a lot of that, and it's a fantastic experience once it gets going. This has been another meme review. Thanks for watching. I'm the Digital Man.